name's Sarah Legge. I'm a Gallatin senior studying environmental design for the regenerative economy. So before I get into my project, I want to talk a bit about my major, my concentration, and why I got interested in regenerative design, because I get a lot of people asking me, well, what is regenerative design? Like, what does that mean? And so my interest in regenerative design really started at kind of my interest in sustainability and kind of thinking about, okay, how can sustainability do more? Because really, at the core, sustainability is just doing less bad. And regenerative design is kind of pushes the boundaries of sustainability, and that it's actually restorative. Um, and so, how can regenerative design be restorative? Like, what is giving regenerative design the capability to be restorative? And normally, this field of design is applied to agriculture, and they normally talk about regenerative design in the fields of like permaculture or like new farm designs or agroforestry. But I wanted to think about it more so in the application for industrial design, for material design. And so, what were the entities that were allowing for the regeneration of degraded ecosystems? Like, what is it? And so, when I really started to dig, I started to kind of see this pattern that it was the microbes that were in the soils, that were in the aquatic waterways, that were allowing for the resuscitation and the restoration of these degraded lands. Whether it was bacteria, fungi, algae, these were the kind of the superhero microorganisms that were capable in restoring. Um, and it was the same bacteria that's found in your fermented food products, in your yogurts, E. coli. And what's so interesting is that these are the biological entities that are the most regenerative of them all. In that, E. coli can replicate and divide in less than 12 hours. Same with like lactic acid bacteria. These are super, super fast growing bacteria. And so I immediately got enthralled by bacteria and became a bacteria fanatic. And as a designer, I knew that my role was to creatively communicate the power of these microbes through visual storytelling, and found that bacterial pigmentation was a good place to garner excitement, curiosity, and interest in regenerative design. And so I started and over this past summer, and I received a research grant through Gallatin to pursue research on biodesign applications to environmental problems. And so I was very curious in researching the textile industry, as well as fermentation applications for the bioremediation of soil. Um, and so kind of seeing what are the opportunities that bacteria can also completely reduce energy and water consumption. And so given COVID, I could not access any biolabs. I was a part of a biolab called GenSpace in Brooklyn, Citizen Biolab, meaning it's open to the public. And so I instead chose to create a biolab in my own home where I was able to make an incubator, a makeshift flow hood, a humidifier, and run safe at-home home experiments. And so I looked into bacteria that produce certain pigments, which whether it was viocillin, melanin, through the oxidation of different enzymes like lysine and tyrosine. And so the design process is really interesting for me in that I think there were so many times where I wanted to kind of control how the pigment was going to come out from the bacteria, and really try to figure out how can I get the most positive results. And given that it's an experiment, it was, trial and error is part of the process. But what I realized from the design process was that the bacteria, there's a degree of uncertainty. And you have to learn how to work with that uncertainty, and you have to find the parts that you can control. And so that was the humidity. Is everything sterile? Are there any competing organisms? And so you think about kind of designing the environment around the bacteria in order for you to efficiently run a series of experiments. So that was kind of the interesting, the part of the design process. I also realized I think oftentimes, we see science as something like that's meant for scientists, or I think we see industry, like being an engineer and then is meant for engineers. And this kind of like multidisciplinary research can be kind of scary. And so even for me, like kind of like acquiring this bacteria, I was kind of like, oh, like, am I capable in doing this? But it's such a, I think that's what's so interesting about design is that, design, you can kind of go into all these fields and be experimental. Like that's your goal, is to be creative, to think outside the box. And so that was kind of what was so exciting for me, was to see how bacteria could transcend the biological, but also like think about the properties of bacteria, like growing, and like how do we rethink of like design as like a growing process, and almost like how do designers become farmers in many way. And that was kind of interesting because I think in very much the same way, farmers don't really know what's the output of their the vegetables that they're growing. They can design the soil, the additives, or the certain the environment that the vegetables grow around. But at the end of the day, there is a degree that it might not grow, or you might not get high yields. But how do we learn to work with that, and how can we see that as a positive? And so I think what's so interesting about the opportunities in biotech, and in biodesign, is that you can, one, it is because it is regenerative by nature. It's a it can drastically reduce energy and water demands, but also that it completely it changes the mindset of engineering and design into one that is accepting of uncertainty. It's accepting of kind of like the loss of power, because you end up becoming the passive designer, and the microbes are the ultimate designers. And so I think that was what was interesting about the design process, and that's what I'm planning on moving forward in, with all of my experiments. I think kind of seeing like, okay, how is this economically viable at an industrial level? And so, yeah, I had a really awesome time kind of exploring, and I'm hoping to do more, run more experiments in my house, and explore this field further, because I think it's something that I'm so passionate about, so interested in, and I think it could really align with bioeconomic goals, and align with the sustainability movement, and the climate movement, and kind of help in also kind of pursuing innovation, and growing economically and in tech, but also being sustainable, and kind of learning how to adapt to a new climate. So thank you so much.